notification about now. So before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we stand and pay my respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging. As we gather here today, it is important that we take a moment to reflect on the history and ongoing legacy of colonization and its impact on the indigenous peoples. The land we stand on has a rich history that goes back thousands of years, and it is important that we recognize and honor the contributions of the indigenous people who have called this place their home. The land that Sheridan occupies is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Wendat, the Métis, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. But as we meet on this virtual platform, I would urge each one of you to acknowledge and reflect on whose land it is that you are occupying. In doing so, we can also begin to inculcate and acknowledge the indigenous ways of knowing and being. These ways of knowing and being are grounded in a deep respect for the land and all living things and are based on a holistic understanding of the interconnectedness of all things. We must also recognize that Indigenous peoples continue to face systemic injustices and discrimination, and that we all have a collective responsibility to work towards reconciliation and healing. This includes supporting Indigenous led initiatives, um, learning from Indigenous knowledge keepers, and advocating for Indigenous rights and sovereignty. As we move forward, let us do so with humility and willingness to learn and grow, and let us honor the land and its original caretakers by working towards fulfilling our collective responsibility towards those who have gone before us, those who are here, and those who are yet to come. Um, So I would like to welcome all the people who are everybody to this session, and for those of you who are here for the first time and are wondering what Edge is about, Edge is the social entrepreneurship hub affiliated to with the Sheridan College. It is a vibrant community of people from all backgrounds and walks of life who believe that entrepreneurship can make lasting change in society. We support change makers as they explore entrepreneurial approaches to creating a more equitable and sustainable world. Um, Edge helps founders grow ideas and ventures that support a triple bottom line approach of people, planet, and profit, offering mentorship, learning programs, an inclusive community, co working space, and funding. Edge connects Sheridan students to opportunities to learn and work with startups, and collaborate with community partners to support impact entrepreneurs in the region. Um, we are also excited to inform all of you that we have started a new new membership model for the public. And if you've been looking for affordable and centrally located co-working space in the heart of Mississauga, we have co-working memberships starting as low as $100 a month. This includes the hot desk access to kitchenette with all-day coffee, tea, meeting room time, and discounts, even business mailing address, and a lot more. We also have day passes available, and all our plans are month to month and flexible for your teams. Um, we also, for Sheridan students, we also have a free membership that's available with access to learning modules on entrepreneurship, change making, and all staff advice. I will be leaving the link in the chat to both the memberships shortly. So if you're interested in this, please do sign up. We also have upcoming public sessions, that is the building your first prototype, that's on next Thursday, and then the legal bootcamp for startups, essential practices for successful entrepreneurs. After that, or most of our sessions are on Tuesdays. These are our social media handles, so if you want to stay in the loop, please do follow us. And with that, I would like to introduce our facilitator for today, Dana Moskowitz, who has been a facilitator with us for a long time. I'm very glad. Just 1 second, there's a glitch on my end. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry, yeah. Dana is a professor of digital marketing and strategy at Sheridan College in the postgraduate and bachelor's BBA program. She transitioned to teaching after spending 20 years in the corporate world, leading large-scale product launches, marketing programs, brand refreshes, and many strategic corporate projects. Dana spent most of her career in the technology space within B2B and B2C. Her passion for teaching and learning is being part of the learning journey with her students and helping them build the right toolkit and business knowledge to advance their careers. And with that, I would like to openly say to Dana and let her take it away.
Hi, everyone. It's great to meet you all. And Sanjana, thank you for the beautiful land acknowledgement was amazing and for just the warm introduction. I am so excited to be here and to see all of you. I can't believe we have such an amazing high attendance. It's so great. Lots of pressure. So as I'm just talking, I'm going to get my presentation set up here and my screen set up while we're talking, but just wanted to check in with all of you. So I'm just trying to moving some things around here. I have a lot of boxes open. I'm just going to move a couple of things around. Sorry, 1 sec. I can, it's funny because I can see you guys in the middle of my, I'm just moving okay, I can move that up here. Okay. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time to get organized on Zoom. So thank you, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to speak to the team at Edge. I hope that all of you are well and spring is coming, so which is nice. And please, as I go through my presentation, please feel free to ask questions throughout. Sanjana is going to be monitoring the chat as well. Definitely look forward to your engagement. It's always more fun when there's engagement in these sessions. So I have a question just to get us kind of warmed up and started. And, definitely type in the chat or unmute yourself. But if you could have one marketing superpower, what would it be? I'll tell you what mine is, but I'm not going to tell you right now. Just throw it out there. All answers are good answers.
The best storyteller alive.
It's so hard to be an amazing storyteller. It takes experience. I'm always learning. That's a good one. Anyone else? It's hard.
A charisma.
So good. Oh my goodness, I can see lots of ultimate silver tongue, the complete inability to get flustered, embarrassed, or otherwise mid-presentation. Fill up content calendar. Oh my goodness, this is all confidence, going viral. Yeah, dedication. I mean, confidence, high levels of engagement. These are all, this is actually amazing. Personal connection, everyone who sees my ads or people who want to buy. It's so interesting that you say that, Paige, because I literally just finished a class with my students. I finished and then I came here and we were talking about Google Ads. We were getting into the details and, discussing that, it's one thing for people to click on your ads, but they may not always be the right audience. So all of these things, magnetic charisma, so it's difficult to get that out when you're creating content and persuasion, lots of likes and comments. These are, so thank you everyone for sharing because, sometimes it takes a lot to share these things. And I have to say, one of my marketing superpower was if I could know, those keywords that are going to stick. I wish that I had that ability, but as you guys know, you're all entrepreneurs. Marketing is a testing and learning. It really is. There's no perfect science. We learn by experience, obviously, in anything we do, but there is a lot of testing and learning and trying things in the market. And we're going to be talking about, well, I'll go on to the next slide. Sometimes I get ahead of my slides. So today we're going to be talking about integrated marketing. We're going to go through the PESO model. social media marketing. We're going to talk a little bit about paid versus organic and then do a wrap up. And you're going to see, I'm going to start off the presentation with almost, I mean, this is a digital marketing 101. You know, like we can get into the depths of digital marketing for sure. And that's why, you know, when I teach digital marketing, I've like part 1 and part 2 in semesters. But I want to, at the beginning of the session, build out that marketing foundation. So we're going to just touch on a couple of topics before we get into the digital marketing piece. And you'll see why it's so important. So you'll see I have a whole bunch of quotes throughout, but I thought this was a good one before we begin. Marketing is a generous act of helping someone solve a problem, and it's their problem. Marketing helps others become who they seek to become. And remember, we're as marketers, we're trying to problem solve or show that we can problem solve for our customer. So I always tell my students, and even when I was when I was in industry, it's not about you, it's about them. You know, you can take it for what it is, but that's essentially what you have to think. You have to put you may not be the customer of your product. So it's about them. Always think about that. So in today's market, and you know, a few of you, or actually I would say almost all of you, talked about content and having content that sticks and how difficult it is with persuasion and having charisma. And so in today's market, I mean, these are real things, right? Because we know that we see like approximately 10,000 marketing messages a day. That is a lot, whether we realize it's a marketing message or we're not actually sitting there and counting them, but only 4% are remembered. And you want to make sure that your marketing message is remembered, which is really important as to why we need to understand our customers so well. And as you know, too, I'm sure, is that we're inundated with content it's all around us. And I grew up, you know, with not having as much content all around it, and it is actually overwhelming. So we don't really have a large attention span to take time to spend on each message. So we have to think about that. And then that idea of just repeating the messages and making sure that you as a brand or your business are constantly repeating the same messages until it actually resonates. So when we talk about, and this is why we talk about integrated marketing. Integrated marketing, whether you've done it or not, we're going to have a quick review of what this is. And it aligns your brand messaging across many different channels. So it doesn't mean because you have, you know, all the channels at your disposal, you should use them all. That's not what I'm saying. Is of the channels that are appropriate for your brand, for your products, services, and for your customers, across all of those channels in which you find appropriate for your business, and making sure that those messages are consistent. So for example, messaging can be imagery, it can also be content, right? So you want to make sure that there is that consistency in terms of the look and feel, in terms of the tone and the voice. Because remember, also the other thing too is that you may not have one customer. For example, if you're on 10 different channels or different platforms, your customer might find you on only a few of those, but you have to have consistency across. Okay, so when we talk about integrated, so many things opening. When we talk about integrated marketing, and in terms of the strategy, what does it actually mean? I talked about, you know, we having the common messages across all different channels, and here is a visual to show you what that actually means. So you see the customer is in the center, right? And they're just being bombarded with messages, not only from your brand, from everywhere else. And so when we look at integrated marketing, it's integrating that message into all different, whatever you choose to do in terms of your content and your marketing, whether it's multimedia, social, mobile, public relations, but making sure there's an integrated message. So why do we do this? Well, it's not only just to get the attention and the engagement of our audience, but it really does help build that brand. And sometimes, we see a brand or we see a message in the corner of our eye, because as we're scanning so many different messages, and when we keep seeing it again, and as I said, you need to see it about 5 to 7 times, that's when we start to get interested and you start to become top of mind. And this idea that if you're constantly seeing the same messages, that idea that, maybe you as a brand are a thought leader within the space, and you start to build and bridge that loyalty and that trust. And the fact is, it also just saves money if you can continuously use some of the same messaging across, all of your platforms. And so when we saw that there's in that image that we saw before with the customer in the middle in terms of integrated marketing, but when we look at this peso model, and I don't want to get too theoretical with you, but we think about all of those different channels, whether it's social media, whether it's traditional media, PR, whatever it is, what we do is we connect it, and we look at this, we connect it through this peso model. It's just an easier way to look at all the different channels that you might have access to or that you might market. So if we look here in the peso model in terms of, we have the earned media, the shared media, the owned, and the paid. And you might be doing, a little bit of paid media. I think someone had mentioned that. You might be doing, your own media, which is really about your own Instagram channel or your own website. And maybe you're trying to get into some earned. But this is just a good way to kind of a snapshot view on how to look at your marketing. And you're going to see why this is important as we start to get into the digital space. So I have a question for you guys, and I just want you to take maybe 3 minutes. Actually, sorry, it's coming up in one of my future slides. But just as an example that I wanted to, so I want you to think about for your own businesses, where do you think you can take advantage of in terms of that peso model? We'll go back to it in just a minute. But just as an example, in terms of integrated marketing, and we look at the New York Times, and I thought this was actually quite interesting that the New York Times, they had several years ago, they had a campaign called the Truth Campaign. And I'm sure you all remember of that, the conversations around fake news. It really actually did have an impact on the news outlets. And so what the New York Times found was that their sales were sluggish. Their goal was to really show that they were a trusted news outlet, that they were the source for news, that their journalism was both reliable as well as independent, which was really important for them to just show that they were a leader within the space. And so what they did was they engaged in this campaign, or they embarked on this campaign called the Truth Campaign, to show the truth about media and how their journalists are, reliable as well as independent. And they took this integrated marketing campaign and they did PR, they had some earned media, digital, social, print. And you can see here in some of the examples that I've just shown, there was some print here. There was, I think it was actually their first sort of foray into TikTok. They had a YouTube video that you guys can check out after. They also had some buttons. So what they really did was they took this full-scale integrated approach to build out their message and to gain attention. And you can see with this Truth Campaign across, and I'm just showing you a small sample here, but you can see that it's consistent in terms of, the look and the feel and the messaging. And so that's what we mean by integrated marketing. And actually, what they found was, towards the end of the campaign, the New York Times, first of all, the results from their views on social, and it blew them out of the water. But I think the key thing is that at the end of the day, we want to see what actually, yes, there's impressions and yes, there's clicks, but how did that translate into results? And the results, they increased their subscriber base by 100% versus the previous 6 weeks. So, and it was because they took a very strategic approach from an integrated marketing perspective. So I just wanted to give you that example on what that actually looks like. and it's interesting from a traditional, or more of a traditional type of business, or that's
The truth is,
okay. So my question for you guys is, when you look at the peso model, and I can go back to it, what part of that peso model do you think you can use at this stage of your venture, and how? And just, it's more of a reflection for you just to think about, jot a couple things down so you know to come back to it. And I can actually, perhaps maybe I should just go back to the peso model just to show you. And take 3 minutes. I should watch the clock. If you can take 3 minutes, I'll stop talking and just think about. And I love these comments. Well, I'll talk to the comments in a minute, but I appreciate you sharing the comments. We'll just wait just another minute, because it's really just to get your sort of the thoughts flowing. And we see here Patrick said all because you're new to the field, and you're probably thinking, oh my goodness, where do you start first, right? And so we'll talk about some places to start, but you can, it's definitely, I can see it can be overwhelming when we look at this, and you kind of just want to take each part, separate it, and just and focus. You can't, no one can do everything. Okay, and these are such great comments here. The use of shared, own media, all content marketing. We need to share our experience. Experiences are so important, and if you can get that in the written word and share those experiences with others. And Catherine, I don't know what business you're in, but I am curious now. Increase community experience too. Amazing. Okay, I'm going to move on. I'm happy that Ethan said earned and shared seem fitting for a video game launch. Yeah, definitely earned for sure, right? You got to get users on your game and sharing their experiences. This is fantastic. And I know that you're all writing this down in the comments, which I absolutely love, but make sure you write it down on your own piece of paper too, just because you've taken the time to think about it and share it with us, which I so appreciate, but also you want to keep it for yourself too, so you can remember what your thoughts were with regards to this and what you should go back to. Okay. I gotta now move to a couple more slides here. Okay. So now we're moving on to, and you're going to see how this all connects. So we talked about that idea of integrated marketing and the platforms. We'll come back to different platforms, but now this knowing your customer, and sometimes, and depending, you're all in different stages of your business, but sometimes, and if I asked you, you might say, yeah, of course I know my customer. And then if I asked you to write it down, it might be even a little bit more difficult to actually write it down, because you know it in your mind, but sometimes it's actually difficult to to write it down, all the details about your customer. You could just be, in the moment, always interacting with your customers. So I always find this an interesting experience or activity to go through. I'm going to talk you through it, but some of you might need to start on this journey. Some of you might need to come back and revisit it. But you have to remember, the key thing is, I know you can all read, but everyone is not your customer. That is the key. It'll never work. Okay, so I'm going to show you this video. It's Apple, and I know they do things really amazing, but I just want you to see this video and think about it. And you can type it in the chat. Who do you think the audience is specifically for this video? Whether you're an iPhone user or not.
Felix?
Name?
Felix.
Date of birth?
November 5th, 1986.
Tracking current location.
Can I have a taste of your ice cream?
Here's what you spent last month.
Crumbs from your table. Can I interfere in your crisis? Can you hear those people behind
This will
me?
help with the itching.
Okay. I thought this was funny, and hopefully you guys did too, but I am curious, you may not be the audience for this ad. And so, but I'm curious, who do you think, and you can characterize a person in any which way, or maybe their problem. Yeah, Aditi, exactly. People who value privacy, right? Someone who is I'm a little bit paranoid about my privacy. This completely resonated with me. The paranoid, exactly. Just use that. I just use that. Parents, 100%. People who spend online and through their mobile phone, for sure. Doesn't it give you the confidence that I might be safer using an iPhone from a privacy perspective than maybe an Android, possibly? Clever ad. Yeah, those who value, anyone who uses modern technology, and people who've experienced fraud, 100%. And so what I love what you guys are all saying here is that you've actually been able to really pinpoint target, the needs, the issues, the wants of who they're targeting. They're not targeting, someone who doesn't really care about privacy. They're not targeting someone who just wants to use their phone for social and has never even thought about privacy. There's a very specific ad with a very specific audience. So that's great. Thank you everyone for joining in on that. So this takes me to, when we talk about products not all products can appeal to everyone. And this is why we have to actually, and you may have one product that can appeal to two different markets, but when you're marketing, you have to be extremely, extremely focused on the need and the want and who your audience is. So not everyone's going to love an iPhone. And then when we look here in terms of different products for different needs, you have the Android users and the iPhone users and the Microsoft Surface. Just to give you just a little bit about me, I was an Android user since, the day of the Android and when they came out, because I spent many years in telecommunications. My phone died in December and I didn't know what to do. I was going to buy another Android until my kids convinced me that I should actually get an iPhone so we could all be connected, because I was the odd person out. I had an Android, everyone else had iPhones, and we had to use WhatsApp. It was complicated I couldn't track them. So, but that was my need now. And so, someone had mentioned, it's peer pressure a little bit, but someone had mentioned in here, parents, or, why privacy is so important in an iPhone. So, so I switched because I had a different need that the Android couldn't provide me. So in terms of market segmentation, and some of you have already gone through this, but in order to help identify who your ideal customer is, you want to think about all of these critical, all these critical ways to segment your market. And you might segment by behavior, or maybe they're geographic, or maybe even demographic. But these are things that you have to think about, because remember, definitely not your customer. But when we look at, so you come back to this, because the other key thing too is and I think someone had mentioned they've been in business for 20 years, and I don't know what your business is, but it's possible that your customer has changed over the 20 years. So with marketing, you can never set it and forget it, because the market changes all around you. The competition, the environment changes. So we always have to reevaluate who are our customers, who are our competitors. These are all basic marketing 101, but sometimes we forget to do that when we get so involved in, the day-to-day. And so when we look at, some of you might be in B2B, and so we look at B2B, we take a little bit of a different spin in terms of who our customers are, and we focus on, yes, on the behavior, but also on firmographics, whether that's, the industry or the company size, the location, or the revenue. You might say, it depends on how you want to segment your customer base, depending on the business and the industry. So just a couple things to consider. And then once you've identified your segmentation, and sometimes it takes time to go through it, but once you've identified your segmentation, then it's always a really good idea to build a persona. So that idea, and you can see here on the right-hand side, we have the Sarah student is the ideal customer for a coffee shop. And these templates are very easy to find online. But what is a persona? Is that fictitious representation of your ideal customer. And so it helps with visualizing who your target customer is, or even who your current customer is, depending on what stage you are in your venture. And it also just helps to clarify customers' needs and wants. Sometimes we know it's in our mind, but when we have to actually go and write this down, it becomes a little bit more difficult. Or we recognize, I actually don't really know the details of my customers' needs and wants and how they're evolving. So, this is always a great thing to go, and you can get this information from, reaching out to your customers, looking at your competition, asking lots of questions. If you have a customer service team or a sales team, they have great insights into customers' needs and wants. But sometimes we push this aside because we just don't have enough time, especially as an entrepreneur. You might say, okay, this isn't priority right now, but this will serve you really well when you start to go into the digital world and you start to actually, you can go back and, this is almost like this, it's almost like the benchmark of who your ideal customer is. And actually, it's interesting having a visualization. I know it sounds a little bit odd, but it really does help as well. Okay, so just 2 minutes. I just want you to think about, because you might know who your customer is, and that's okay. Jot it down. You want to get down a paper. As you're jotting it down, you might realize, I'm actually not 100% sure. Or maybe now's giving you the time. You're realizing I got to reevaluate this because my customer is changing. So I'm just going to give you 2 minutes. Just jot a couple things down. If you have a pen and paper, type it into your phone. I just want to get you the thinking started. I know 2 minutes isn't enough time, but and I encourage you to go back to some of those slides, and I think you'll all have a copy of this presentation, and look at that segmentation. You might need to do some further segmentation if you feel like you're not, you haven't hit on the right customer yet. Okay. Hopefully that's been 2 minutes. So we're going to move on. Oh, you don't have the slides. Okay, we will get you the slides, Liam, but what I would love for you to do is, wait, Liam, I just want to remember you are in gaming, right? Did I miss that? I feel like I remember you were in gaming. Okay. So go back to some of those slides from a segmentation perspective. I mean, that should sort of you can start to ask yourself questions by just looking at that slide. It's not, it's not detailed, but you definitely reflect on, on who your customer is and start moving and transitioning into building out that persona. Okay. Let's move to the next slide. So now we're moving into, so we talked about integrated marketing and the importance of that. We talked about really understanding your customer. Some of you have done a lot of work on that. And now we're moving into content. Content is everything. It really is. And, content can actually serve us really well in terms of gaining engagement, testing the waters to see what our customers want and like and dislike. And sometimes it takes a little, we'll get into the whole content, and content can also come in different forms. But what is so interesting is that 96% of marketing decision makers say that content marketing has been effective for their brand. So we know that we all consume content, and we all consume different types of content, right? Depending on our interests and our needs and our wants at a particular time or even over time. And so I thought this was actually quite compelling, that, content is it, and we've got to figure out how we can use content in order to pave the way for our business, for growing our business and gaining engagement. Now, the key thing is that, which can be harder to do, is that when you create content, and we'll talk about all sorts of different content, short form and long form, but it's really around educating, engaging, not selling. The days of hardcore selling, I think you can push them aside. Unless it's, you're buying maybe toothpaste or something that's very common, that's very, very transactional, that you sometimes buy just on price, right? Or a box of strawberries here in one store versus a box of strawberries somewhere else. Maybe, these days we shop based on price, right? With inflation. But outside of that, we just want to make sure, when you're building content, educating and engagement are key. And that is, becoming a thought leader, helping someone solve their problem through the content that you're delivering. Show them that, that you can help solve the problem, and you can also make their life easier. And it doesn't matter, what that problem is. We all have sorts of different problems that we're looking for solutions for, right? And so it's also a really great way to build stickiness and connection with your customers. And this idea of community, I think we're all seeking community, especially coming out of the pandemic. I know it's long behind us, but the ability of having all these different social platforms, we have this ability of engaging with like-minded people, as well as building community. You can really seek out sort of community members that are like you. And as a marketer, we need to seek out where those communities are. So it's about educating, it's influencing, informing, warning, and I'll show you some examples about that. Okay, I have this interesting question of how do we educate and engage, but also have a CTA? And so we'll talk about that, because there's some, not everything's easy, but there's some simple ways of getting around that. And so in terms of content and channels, there's lots, and you guys we're not going to run through all of this, but remember, content can be content marketing assets, but it also can be visual assets too. So whether it's long form content or short form content, using influencers, even event marketing, this is all within that sort of integrated marketing framework. So I wanted to give you an example of a friend of mine, Lisa Matam, who is the CEO of her own company called Sahajan. It's a Ayurvedic cosmetic company. So been a longtime friend of her. We went to business school together. And I thought this was interesting, that what she has done with the content, and I'm just showing you her content from Instagram. Okay, so she has an amazing product set. I mean, try it out, because I love it. But outside of me plugging her business, I thought her content was really interesting. She knows her audience really well. So if we look at this, some of you may use cosmetics and some of you may not. But those of us who use cosmetics, when we're putting the creams on our face or doing whatever we're doing, I thought when I saw this post, I was like, this completely helped me. How much do you use? How much sunscreen do you put on in order to block the rays? And so she had a post that just happened to come up around, and you can see here a little visual to help you know exactly how much of each product is needed. So is this, and then she goes to show you, and it's an amazing visual. But did this push her product? No, it didn't. But did this inform and educate? 100%. Is this good content? For someone like me, it was good content. For some of you, obviously this might not be your thing. So did it entice me to want to keep learning more? 100%. And so then another post came out. And this post was about a golden elixir for the skin. and it just seems so easy. The golden elixir, it's a drink, and you can see here on the second slide, or on in this image of what this elixir do. And she talks about how great it is for the skin, and it's a recipe alert. So this is, helpful information because she knows her audience, right? We're interested in skin, taking care of our skin, probably also wellness. And then another post came up, which I thought was interesting, was also these are all Instagram, which was a reel. And so you do not see anything about pushing her product. However, I believe in her elixir, she talks about turmeric, which actually is in some of her products, right? And so, but besides that, then we moved into the reel, and she talks about the word of the day, an Ayurvedic word of the day, which is interesting. And so she mixed it up. This is all very short form content, providing content that is interesting to her customers. So she clearly knows who her customers are. She also is, and I'll answer that in a second, Hannah, because not every piece of content needs a CTA, not every piece. But if you go and, if you're interested in this content, you're going to want to keep coming back, and building that community and engagement is really important. So I'm just going to show you another one, which is NYX, which is another Canadian company, and they sell, women's intimates and bras and underwear. And so I thought this was interesting too, because they had a post. So I'm showing you posts that are not pushing product, but providing some thought leadership in a space in which these businesses live in. And so you can see here that they had a post about the hormonal cycle. This was another post actually, which I found quite interesting, was that they had these city guides, and for different Canadian cities. This one had to be about Ottawa, and actually I found it quite helpful because I was going to Ottawa, and it made me want to engage. And then I started to look to see what other content they had. So you want to create that stickiness to keep your audience coming back with useful, helpful information. And you can see if there's stickiness by the number of likes, the interaction, as well as the comments. So, and there's lots of great questions here, and I will get to them after. Okay, so we talked about, one person said becoming an amazing storyteller, which is, it is definitely a challenge, not always easy to do. And it definitely takes some practice, but that storyteller sets the vision, the values, the agenda of an entire generation that is to come, says Steve Jobs. So this is a pretty powerful statement that he made. So I want to give you a story about this person, Jacques Prévert, and I have to look on my other screen to get all the details of this story. But before I tell you the story about Jacques, I think what's interesting is that storytelling is so powerful. We're all built for stories, and that's what helps build relationships, helps keep us interested, and honestly helps us, makes us feel a little bit more connected. We crave connection with other people. And so, these types of stories are what brings us together. And, maybe I'm going on a little bit of a tangent, but if you met someone kind of on the street and you happen to find out that you both had the same birthday, and, that you may never have had any interest in meeting that person. You may come from completely different worlds, but knowing that you have the same birthday, creates that same connection, right? You start to talk about maybe your personality, your habits, but you have nothing else in common maybe. And so we're craving these types of connections. Okay, so here's a story about Jacques. So many years ago, he's a French poet. He was walking down the street, and along the way, he saw this beggar, and the beggar was asking for money and asked Jacques for money. And Jacques said, actually, I'm just a poet. I don't make a lot of money, but how are you doing it? And the beggar said, actually, I'm blind, and I really do need some money. And so Jacques said, well, I can't actually give you money, but what I can do is I can help you with your sign. I think you need to have a better sign. And so, because it wasn't really going very well, people weren't putting money in his hat. And so what he did was, so he changed the sign. Then a couple weeks later, Jacques walks by the beggar again, and he said, so like, how are you doing? How are things? And the beggar said, actually, I can't believe it. Ever since you changed that sign, and the sign originally was something of like, I'm blind, I need money, like very, no emotion there. But he said, ever since that sign was changed, and I'll tell you what the sign said, ever since the sign changed, I'm filling out my hat 3 times every week or 3 times every day. And so like, it's going really, really well. People stop and give me money and everything's going well. So he said, the beggar was blind. He didn't know what the sign said. So he said, Jacques, what did you put on the sign? And he said, actually, all I put was spring is coming, but I won't see it. So what does that mean? So he changed the sign from I'm a blind, so I'm a blind person of the story to really show that, because people didn't really care. They couldn't really understand it. But when you explain what blindness is to people that can see, and you explain what a blind person is missing to people that can see, you really start to build that empathy. And that idea that he said, spring is coming, but I won't see it. People started to understand what it was like being in the beggar's shoe, and they started to feel some empathy. And that's why he ended up filling up his hat, 3 times a day. So, there was a story. We went from just, so it's like almost like when you have a product selling features and functionality, the question is, and I always tell, when I was in industry and I tell my students this, people don't really care. It's how are you going to solve the problem? How are you going to build connections and build empathy? What does it mean for you? That's kind of what you need to ask. So we're going to talk about a couple of elements of effective storytelling, and then we're going to go into how that translates into our digital platforms. But I thought this was interesting. I don't know if anyone's seen The Handmaid's Tale. I couldn't help but put this quote in. So we just finished watching it not that long ago, but Margaret Atwood is brilliant. She's a brilliant storyteller. And so what does she say? She said, you're never going to kill storytelling because it's built into the human plan and we come with it, which is so true. And so there's 4 elements that we're going to talk about in terms of storytelling. The first one is relatability. That's not familiarity. It connects us to our past, maybe our dreams and our roots. And it actually was interesting because that relatability, even though those people walking by couldn't necessarily relate to the beggar who couldn't see, but with his message, they could kind of put themselves in his shoes, that if we couldn't see spring, it would be awful. And so there's that sort of that sense of relatability. This is, we're drawn to things, we're drawn to people, we're drawn to places. So this is why it is so important to understand who your customers are, because you can build that community and that relatability. The next one is novelty, and I'm going to show you this really funny video from the Dollar Shave Club. Maybe some of you have seen it before, but when we all crave novelty, and we definitely seek it out. There's that space where we crave, where we like things that are familiar, but we're kind of always curious about that novel ideas. Right. And so here's an example of what the Dollar Shave Club did. They were trying to get, their customers were lagging. You couldn't get a large customer base. They had to sell all this product, and they also couldn't get any investors. And so so what they did is they had $5,000 left to do their last effort to really, put together a video that they were hoping was going to go viral, and also create, this engaging message that would get people to start to think about, buying their razors from the Dollar Shave Club. So I'm going to just show you this video.
Hi, I'm Mike, founder of DollarShaveClub.com. What is DollarShaveClub.com? Well, for $1 a month, we send high-quality razors right to your door. Yeah, $1. Are the blades any good? No. Our blades are f***ing great. Each razor has stainless steel blades, an aloe vera lubricating strip, and a pivot head. It's so gentle a toddler could use it. And do you like spending $20 a month on brand name razors? 19 go to Roger Federer. I'm good at tennis. And do you think your razor needs a vibrating handle, a flashlight, a back scratcher, and 10 blades? Your handsome-ass grandfather had 1 blade and polio. Looking good, pop-up! Stop paying for shave tech you don't need. And stop forgetting to buy your blades every month. Alejandro and I are going to ship them right to you. We're not just selling razors, we're also making new jobs. Alejandro, what were you doing last month?
Not working.
What are you doing now?
Working.
I'm no Vanderbilt, but this train makes hay. So stop forgetting to buy your blades every month and start deciding where you're going to stack all those dollar bills I'm saving you. We are DollarShaveClub.com, and the party is on.
I know karate, I know jiu-jitsu, I drive like a gangster when I'm coming to see you, see you. See you, see you.
Okay, so I just wanted to show you, this was to the extreme, right? There was definitely some novelty here. And actually, I would say that they took a risk with this. And because it could, maybe it's offensive to some people, maybe not, but they took a risk. And what's interesting is the Dollar Shave Club got 12,000 orders in the first 48 hours after this was released. So they may have been desperate and decided to kind of go into this space, but they must have also known who their customer base was. They probably had a sense that this would work. So it is interesting. There's a sweet spot between being relatable, but also being too foreign. So this, I would say he was very relatable. This wasn't too foreign. The product is a very simple product. So this is just an example of a little bit of the extreme. They kind of went over the edge, but clearly it served them well. So a couple of things. We talked about relatability. That draws in your audience, but that novelty like this really holds your attention. And I'm just curious, did anyone, when you saw this, did it hold your attention? Some of you may not have, may have thought it was silly. I've seen it a couple of times and it makes me laugh every time. Yeah. And so, that holding your attention, we talked about, we only have a few seconds and this was how many? This is actually 1 minute and 31 seconds. But I would say if I had to guess, most of us held our attention. And so here Ethan said, countless neurons in my brain kicked into overdrive seeing them after all this time. Oh, amazing, funny, you want to watch the whole thing. Exactly. And so you have to know your audience, right? Okay, so
Hi.
I'm just looking at the time and I'm noticing I'm really going over time here. So I'm going to move quickly. And then there's tension. And the next thing is that we always like to, a great story has some sort of tension where the storyteller closes the gap or you have a problem and you are looking for some kind of solution. So, and this is where, you can provide you as a marketer can provide some relief to that problem. Just in the interest of time, actually, you know what? I'm going to show this to you because I think this will really take home the concept of tension. So it's actually just a minute.
Pass is overthrown. It's incomplete.
You all right? Yeah. I just got a lot riding on the big game, that's all.
Yeah, I've been there. How much you in for?
4
$4,000?
4 million.
What?
Everyone kept saying, look at the data before going all in, but I couldn't help myself. It's the big game.
Man, I thought I was bad.
The scariest part is, it's not even my money. There are gonna be a lot of unhappy people if this doesn't pay off.
Well, what's your bet?
We'll be back to the game after this.
See this cream cheese ad? That's my commercial.
Cream cheese! It's the cream cheese of Spencer, loaded with the essence of the island, man. It's Irish.
Get him another drink.
Cream cheese from the island, start your morning off smiling.
So every marketer's fear, to be honest, and I could relate to this, is spending big budget on something that doesn't actually work. And so, this is, you can feel the tension, right? you can feel the tension, and then it ends with, okay, Adobe Marketing Cloud can help you out. So just wanted to show you that idea that it can relate. If you're a marketer, you've had this problem before, it's definitely relatable. There's definitely some tension, and there's a little bit of novelty in there as well. Now I'm just going to, so the last piece is fluency, and which is when we create content and telling a good story, we want to write content like you're targeting a fourth grader. And I know that sounds a little bit silly, but you want to make sure that everyone can understand your content, everyone can understand your concepts. It's easy to grasp, and you don't frankly have to work too hard to get the message. And so what was interesting, this company Mint, now is bought by Intuit, they took very complicated finance concepts, because they're a platform that integrates basically all of your financial accounts, and they simplified it and started to educate their audience, and their audience were more of a kind of a younger generation on how to invest, how to what's banking 101, how do you know what credit card to get, how do you information about budgeting 101. And so what they did was they took very complicated concepts and simplified it. And as a marketer, whether it's in digital or not, this is something that you have to think about, because remember, your audience is probably not as informed as you are about, possibly about their problem or about your product. So a couple of things to think about when you're creating stories. And why is this important in digital? Because you have to think about all these elements before we start to go into the digital world and start creating content. And so there's so many different formats from a digital perspective, whether it's video. We know that video is like the fastest, highest ROI of any format. Animations, interactive stories, games, images, infographics are a wonderful way to actually tell a very complicated stories. I created many of those, especially on the B2B side, but it's like, you guys know what an infographic is, snippets of, you can take something complicated and really simplify it. So just in the interest of time, we're not going to spend time on this, but you want to think about a way to practice this is think about what your founder story is, and go through and answer these questions. And it's a great way to even introduce yourself digitally to the market by creating a video. How did you start your idea? Who are you? And that helps to build that connection with your audience. It brings up an element of personalization, that human touch. So I want you to come back to this slide when you get, it's because it might spark some ideas for you. Okay, I'm just going to move to the next, just because I don't want to keep you guys over time. So you'll do the reflection on your own. But now we're going to move into this digital journey. So we talked about integrated marketing. We talked about who your customer is, and the idea of how to write some really good content in terms of what are the elements that we need in order to write good content. And you guys are all in different industries. So, hopefully you can take some of those strategies and build that into whether you're starting on your journey or you're very far ahead in your journey. So social media is not about the exploitation of technology, but it is that service to community. And if you understand that, you will do really well, because just because there's so many different platforms, it doesn't mean that you have to exploit all of them. That is absolutely not. You have to go to where your community is and start building community as well. That's how you build connections. You want to build this sense of personalization that your audience feels as though you're speaking to them one-to-one, even though you're speaking to them one-to-many. So remember, it's about bringing your audience together and creating really authentic conversations. And you saw when we saw the social post by Sahajan, and someone had asked, well, where's the CTA? There wasn't a CTA there, but you start to think about, well, she talked about, how much of each cream or, you needed and the size of it. That started to create conversation. We start to think, okay, this person's an expert, or this business, they're an expert within the space, or a thought leader. That starts to, sometimes a transaction doesn't happen right away. It takes some time. It takes some time to build that relationship and build community. So when we go into develop, the key components of developing a social strategy, we have to, this is a lot of it is based on, if you have your strategy, you understand who your audience is, you understand your business goals and your product, and that foundation is solid and well built, or maybe you need to go back and look at it again, then you're ready to move into digital or into social. And, even when I've having been in industry for a long time, but even when I tell this to my students who are going into digital marketing jobs after my post-grad class, they always say to me, but why do we need to continue to go over the strategy? Well, if you don't have a strategy, how do you know where you're going? And so, it's always best to spend the time on your strategy and to evaluate where you're going before you actually start to go. Okay. So, and then we look into, so we have to make sure, you have to develop a strategy for every platform, because not all platforms are the same. We're going to talk about a couple of the platforms, but the way you use every platform, there's different purposes of it. So you don't ever want to go ad hoc. That doesn't work to go ad hoc. You're going to just be overwhelmed. And so you have to have a consistent approach and a strategic approach to how you enter into the social, sort of the world of social. And remember, and my team members, when I was in industry, would say, well, we're going to develop all these different blogs and all these posts. And I would say, well, why? Develop a few really good pieces of content where you can get engagement, because that quantity is just, if it's not, doesn't have quality, people will see through it. And then, of course, monitoring and measuring is a part of every digital strategy. Always. So when we look at our digital strategy, this is back to the strategic aspect. Even before we get into the platforms, you want to look at what are some of those values. This may or may not be helpful for you, the elements of the value pyramid, depending on where you are in your startup journey. But your digital strategy should be built with some shared values or experiences in mind. And so I want you to consider this pyramid to look at, maybe your product is a very focus on functional. This may just give you some words to kind of work with. Maybe it saves time, maybe it reduces risk. Maybe there's, it helps reduce anxiety. So you definitely look at this value strategy, because it might spark some ideas in terms of how to craft your digital strategy as well as messages. You want to think about how your product or your service is changing the story for your users. Where are you taking them? You're taking them on a journey. When you enter into the world of social, you're on this journey together. And people, and Howard Schultz, the guru of in Starbucks, if he says, if people believe they share values with the company, they will definitely stay loyal to the brand. So think about this: is that you are marketing. Yes, you might be marketing to the masses, but behind the masses is a person. So we call it business to human marketing. That's why we have to understand who is that ideal person that we're actually marketing to. You want to take an authentic approach to marketing, and you can definitely do that on social. You want to reach people where they natively are. And so, if you are, if you have a gaming product and you think, I don't know anything about the gaming industry, but if you think, I'm just going to go, and Facebook is a good platform, I'm just going to go onto Facebook. Well, that might not be the right platform for your audience, for the gaming audience. Maybe it's not the right demographics. And so you have to just remember that you have to go to where your community is. Don't expect them to find you. And always have that customer mindset always. So here's something that's interesting, and you can take a look at this on your own after. You can go to Hootsuite or even HubSpot. They have lots of this type of data out there if you're trying to see, okay, where do I even start with my social platforms? And you can look, this is only by, age group, so it's kind of one dimension, but might spark some ideas and some things to look at. There's lots of platforms here. There's platforms here that I've never used or never heard of. But just something to look at, right? And actually, it is interesting. What I found is that when you look at, Instagram, the highest user base is 16 to 24. Maybe you know that, maybe you don't. But if you look at, you can look at the difference between female and male. So something just to take a look at. And so you want to ask yourself, where does your audience live? And so that's where your research comes in. You have to look at all the different, just because you have all these platforms at your fingertips, it doesn't mean that you should actually use them. So you have to, this is where the strategy comes in, and you have to do your research. So just remember a couple of, just looking at our timing, but a couple of, rules when it comes to social engagement. 80% of your posts should engage and inform. You want to be authentic. You don't want your audience to always feel like, okay, they're trying to, you might just want to read a post because it's interesting. You don't always want to feel like there's like a sales tactic. That's why we kind of separate it. It's a rule, whether it's 75 to 25, but in 20% should be really promoting your brand. So we want to give versus take. That's essentially what it is. And then you can look at the rule of thirds here too. 1/3 is promoting your brand, 1/3 is sharing ideas and stories, and 1 should involve any personal interactions with your audience. So that idea of social, and it's all about conversation, and which is what you want to create. So you have to, if you're going to decide to move into the social space and into digital marketing, you have to kind of be all in. So remember, it's not about you, it's about your audience, and which is why we do so much work in persona development and understanding our audience. You have to always monitor those conversations, always monitor the comments. You find golden nuggets in those comments. Golden nuggets about what people think is not so great about your product or service, or the content that you're posting, or what they're absolutely loving, or maybe they give you ideas on further product development. So don't ever set it and forget it. It takes a lot of time, but you every so often find those golden nuggets in your comments that really help kind of move you into a path that you may never have even thought of, or something that might actually you just stop doing. You have to make sure that you constantly stay on top of trending events, and leave it up to you to determine, I would say stay away from political conversations, but your business well and your audience. So that's a decision that you'll make, but you don't ever want to alienate your audience. That's for sure. But that's something that you have to decide between, for your own business. And some things that you can do is you can create themes of the week, like you see throwback Thursdays or Tuesdays, or, a theme where you can not train your audience, but to come back to get certain types of information. Okay, so I'm just going to cover a couple of platforms just to give you an idea of what why you would use the platform and how you should think about these platforms. So Facebook, and I gave the example of, and I don't know if, gaming, if this is a great platform for gamers. I think it was Liam who had said, I can't remember, but, Facebook's been around for a long time. There's millions of followers. They have a great business page where you can get amazing analytics, and from an ad perspective you can really segment your audience to target specifically who your audience is. And I mean, the other great thing too is Facebook is filled with communities for all sorts of different types of communities, interest communities, you name it, it's probably out there. So but it might not be right for your business. And so you have to kind of do that investigation to see if your audience is there. Don't just, because the fact is you don't have the time or the budget, right, in order to, spend time on platforms that might not be actually useful for you. So this whole idea of Facebook is really about getting audience engagement, and status updates and photos. It is interesting. All these platforms are kind of not merging into one another, but they all do kind of updates. They all do videos. They all do imagery. So they kind of start to look the same after a while. And yes, Liam said, I see here that you believe in the power of TikTok, and it is an amazing platform. Might not be right for all businesses, but I do agree with you. It is a very powerful platform. In terms of Instagram, it's very visual oriented. I would say even more so than Facebook. I mean, it's as we saw from that Hootsuite, that slide, it's really geared for more of a younger audience. You can actually, it does have a really great ad platform, and you don't have to spend a lot of money, and you can really segment your audience, but you have to connect it to a Facebook account because they're both part of Meta. So just something to think about when you have a business account. But it is really amazing for short form content as well as like a very deep brand engagement. But you have to determine, is your audience on Instagram? Is that the right platform? But it is a very visually appealing platform. And then there's YouTube. We talked about before that YouTube is, video has the highest ROI, and, it is preferred by more of a younger audience. And well, it's a big age range, right? 18 to 49. But it's a huge search engine as well. So it is really good for educating an audience on, how to use your products and services, like how-to videos, showcasing services, even behind the scenes videos. You can do these types of things on other platforms, but creating a YouTube channel and having a library of content can be very valuable for your business, especially, if your product or service is more complex and you have customers constantly reaching out and asking questions, this might be a great way to not only educate your audience, but to create some interesting engagement. There's, oh my goodness, I'm just trying to think. There's one of the energy drink companies, which it just slipped my mind. It's one of the biggest ones you guys probably know. They have an amazing YouTube channel on kind of like extreme sports. You guys probably know. Yeah, Red Bull. Yeah, exactly. And, it is interesting. Like some of these extreme sports, you look at it and you can't, like, it makes my stomach turn. But people, we crave that. It's like craving novelty. They've created novelty, and you keep coming back for that type of content. And, that obviously content is right for Red Bull, but they've created this community around that type of content. So interesting to look at. You might just want to, might want to sort of search around to see what different brands are doing and the types of content and how they're using YouTube. And then there's Twitter, which is amazing for microblogging. There's obviously some controversy around Twitter now, so you have to see if it's right for your own platform, but it is a great way to even just find like trending topics. If you're looking for for your business, some trending topics to kind of latch onto, it might be a good resource for your business. It's microblogging because you have to use very few characters to kind of get your message across, but you can create a lot of engagement. In my past, I've used Twitter as for social customer service. When I was in the telecom business, whenever we would have outages and having, network massive outages, and instead of having tons of customers call into our network operations center, we used Twitter as a way to be more proactive, to give updates on what was happening. So, you have to think about how you want to use these platforms and what your engagement objective is. And then there's TikTok, which is, so interesting because think it was, yeah, it was Liam that said TikTok. It's also a form of microblogging. You know, it's capped at 60 seconds. You can find any community on TikTok. So I just came across this one, this crocheters of TikTok. I mean, this is where I thought it was actually kind of interesting because I'm not a crocheter, but I kind of wish that I am. This looks like they're creating some really fun stuff. So this is what I'm saying. It's, you have an opportunity now within digital to find your community that relates to your product and service. It's not only for you to connect with them, but also to learn more about who your customer base is. So TikTok is a wonderful platform. I mean, you know, if you can find the crocheters of TikTok, there is definitely a community out there. And some of you may just be using TikTok for your own personal reasons. So you probably are in it on a daily basis. I know my kids, one of my kids absolutely loves TikTok, and actually she learns a lot of interesting things on TikTok too. So, but you know, we see there's a lot of influencers on TikTok, and you know, that's a whole other strategy with using influencers. But I wanted to just give you a feel to really understand. What I want you to walk away is not to say, oh yeah, I'm going to use this platform and that platform, is really to start to think about what actually makes sense for your business. And it's going to take time to do some research, and maybe you're already doing it. So maybe, hopefully I've given you a couple of tips to think about if things are working or not working. But I just wanted to show you some other thing that was I thought was interesting, just another campaign. So Spotify had this campaign called the Find Your Feels campaign. And what they did was they showcased 5 influencers from, you know, professional footballers to, you know, there was all sorts of different individuals. And what they did was they created 5 short films on their own and talked about songs that actually shaped them. And if you think about Spotify, so, you know, many of us use Spotify, but it created a lot of engagement. So it wasn't like, there wasn't a CTA to say, you know, go find this special. This was about, so for those of us that like music, and then, you know, there are some songs that kind of bring you back to, you know, maybe of a time when, you know, this really resonated and gained absolutely a lot of traction. And they were not only on Instagram, but they were on many other channels. So, you know, you don't always have to push product. These are different ways to create some engagement based on, even just solely based on interest. And then you can start to say, oh yeah, this person, yeah, I have a song like that. You start to kind of build that connection. You can look at the Find Your Fields. It was a really interesting campaign. I'm looking at our time, and so we just kind of went through the different social platforms and kind of some different ideas of how you could use social to your advantage without really pushing a product or your service. But what we have to think about are paid versus organic, because this is a question that comes up all the time. And so, you know, there's a place, if you haven't gone on your journey yet in terms of digital, I would say start testing things out, start testing out some content from an organic perspective, see what works and what doesn't work, because you don't want to put your budget into paid advertising if you really aren't sure. I mean, you'll never be 100% certain, especially when it comes to marketing, right? But you want to be, when you're putting some budget aside, and you know, you have a few dollars to spend on a paid ad, you want to have kind of tested out some content before you go into that paid. So really understanding, what are those keywords, what's driving traffic. You need to kind of dig a little bit deep, dig deep to, you know, to getting things going, and to really understand what makes your business tick and what's going to create the most exposure for your business. You know, organic does take a long time to, you know, can take a long time to build, but, and, you know, if you're in a very competitive industry, you might not have the luxury of time. But I would say, just based on my advice, if you haven't gone into digital and you're not really sure what works and what doesn't work, start to play around with, or, you know, start to focus on the organic versus before you start to spend your money on paid advertising. If you decide to put some money into paid advertising, always watch your budget, because you can run through your budget pretty quickly. And the worst is when you run through your budget quickly on customers who are just, clicking on your ads, or what you think are prospects clicking on your ads, but they really don't end up turning to be paying customers. Okay, I'm going to move a little bit quickly here. So I want you to think about, after we've had this discussion on, okay, so what actually, what platforms, should you start to consider? But before you even go into that space, you have to realize that content marketing is definitely a commitment. You have to constantly keep it going, especially if you have really good content. Your followers are going to expect more and more. So you don't want to just, kind of jump in if you don't have the bandwidth. I mean, the time or the energy. Like you almost want to sort of go into it at a slower pace. Walk before you run, because it is a commitment, and it's a pretty big commitment to move into this space. So, but how do you optimize your content? It doesn't mean you have to have completely different content for every channel. You can curate content that is not yours, but obviously, you give credit to the original poster. That is okay. You can do behind the scenes videos. People like to see these authentic videos, of the founder. So, think about things like that, of how you can, make the most use of your time, be as efficient as possible, but create kind of, lasting content or engaging content. And you can also, the other actually interesting thing is this crowdsourcing feedback is really, so if you're able to create discussion, you can crowdsource some feedback. So think about how you can almost, you don't always have to be the content creator. You can seek content. You can go out to your customers if you have a nice following base to help, crowdsource some content from them as well. Starbucks many years ago, and yes, it's Starbucks, but it doesn't mean that any startup can't do this either. Where it was a red cup campaign, and where you got a red cup and you could draw and you can put a design on the red cup. I think it was around the holiday time, and then people started to post their designs, which created such a huge following and content that frankly Starbucks didn't really have to manage, because the user base created that content for them and got a lot of interesting engagement. So you can see how you can build community in different ways without having to, you put a challenge out there without having to spend money. And you gotta test. And this is why that idea of social listening is super important. Monitor your audience. What platforms are they using? How are they engaging? And you also want to monitor your competitors, because your competitors will give you some really great ideas on, different types of content, how to create engagement. Not to say that you should copy what they're doing, but they may give you some completely different ideas that you never actually thought about. So so as the creator, you also got to do the listening as well. And then just remember, we talked about testing your content is so important. Every platform is different. So just make sure that you never set it and forget it. That is the worst thing that you could ever possibly do. Monitor, test, see if you're meeting your goals. And then I know we're kind of coming to the end here, but the idea of a content calendar. So if you decide you want to move into creating content on social, you want to be organized. And so you can look up on Google content calendars for marketers, and you're going to get tons of different ideas. But this is a great way to organize your content by theme, by day, whatever that is. You have to be very organized. Remember, I said never be ad hoc when it comes to content and when it comes to digital as well. So a content calendar will help you, really will help you organize your content and help you organize all of your channels. So this is just one example of a content calendar, but there's so many templates out there. HubSpot actually is a fantastic resource. They have tons of templates. If you guys haven't been to HubSpot yet, maybe you've used HubSpot. If you haven't, they're my go-to. There's always like free downloads for all sorts of different templates that will really help you with your business. So in terms of, content calendars, and we're coming to the end here, but I just want to, there are lots of free tools out there, even to get you started if you wanted to use a platform. Hootsuite had like a free starter package. Good Day. Prism is a great resource if you guys haven't used it, by Environics, to really understand sort of like social behaviors of different communities and postal codes. Check it out. It depends if you're, what type of business you are, but it'll give you some amazing insights all for free. Yeah, and Facebook Business Suite, is also, there's so many of them out there. These are just like literally the tip of the iceberg, but so just to end off, you want to make sure you understand your brand story, really understand who your audience is, take the time to write it out, because what you have in your head might be a little bit more difficult when you write it out, and just do some exploring, figure out where your audience is living on what platform, and create content that is not only like absolutely engaging, that really focuses on thought leadership, but that creates also a sense of personalization, making the other person feel as though you're speaking one-to-one. And we have that luxury of some of these platforms where we can accomplish that. So go back and think about the 4 elements of great storytelling. And don't be shy, tell people about your founder story. You guys are all doing amazing things, no matter where you are on your journey. Keep working it, it doesn't happen overnight. So just be patient with yourselves. And that is it. I didn't think I would go right to the end, and I had some activities that I wanted us to do. I don't know if there's any questions. There was lots of things that came up, and I know might be out of time. Sinjana, just wanted to reach out to you.
I think there was one question which was from Sparky, which was like, how does strategy differ from tactics?
Yeah, okay, I saw that come up. That was actually a great, so for those of you that are leaving, thank you for attending. That was a great question, because strategy is basically your plan. What does the road ahead look like? The tactics are how you're going to actually execute on them. And so they come very close together. I always said, you can have a really amazing strategy, but if you can't execute on it, then your strategy is nothing. So the tactics are how you're executing. The strategy is that blueprint, the path in which you're going to execute on.
Yeah, I don't think there were any other questions that were missed in the chat. Oh, I see another one that was from Sparky as well, which was, how can I sell online without giving the pushy car salesman vibe?
Yeah, and I think and that is the challenge. You want to be seen, and it's Sparky, I don't know what business that you're in, but you want to start to position yourself as a thought leader within your space, really gaining that trust through really good content and conversation, because once you build that trust and you build that connection, then moving into having that it's almost like you're like pulling your prospect along the journey. Once they see that you're trustworthy and that you're engaging and a thought leader, as we start to move down the funnel, that's when you can start to kind of position your product. So it's like building trust and awareness and educating, and then you almost have to, maybe next time we talk about what that marketing funnel actually looks like. But people I would say even more so now, we get turned off of like hardcore sales, unless you're selling toothpaste or something. Or if there are any other questions.
Thank you so much, Dana. I think that was it. And thank you so much for providing. This was a wonderful session, and as usual, it was lovely to hear from you. And to all our public participants, thank you for joining